Welcome back to another installment of Aquarius Farms. Today we're going to be discussing the construction and, I guess for lack of a better term, anatomy of one of our polyculture long growing beds. Now these rows are somewhat based on Caribbean style of polyculture. And as I briefly mentioned in a previous installment, they're constructed primarily of rotten logs and the sod that we sourced on site with the topsoil piled on top of it. Now they might look ridiculously tall, and you'd think that they'd be fragile and prone to erosion, but we bucket packed the sod and logs to an extent where we really don't have a problem with these things being unstable. In fact, you can walk on the top of them quite easily, even though they're about 18 inches wide, without doing any damage whatsoever. And we took a rototiller and we tilled the top 6 inches, picked the rocks, and then essentially planted it. Now, one thing we got lucky with is when we had our soil tested, it turns out it's nearly perfect. There's a slight nitrogen deficiency because we have a very high amount of organic matter inside our soil, but that's pretty easily corrected with light applications of things like fish emulsion and the growing of beans, peas, and legumes, which you can see the beginnings of a trellis for over on this bed. Right, so we're going to try and fix nitrogen directly back into the other crops by planting peas and beans in close proximity to the root zone of our other crops. Now these beds are constructed, and actually I should probably move to one that hasn't been fully planted. Let me come over here. Apologize for the shakiness. So here you can see there's quite a bit of grass that's grown out of this bed. That's I guess you could call it a downside if you want of constructing these out of extensive amounts. The sod here was over a foot deep, extensive amounts of sod. Now that's going to work to our benefit in the long term because it's going to fuel that bacterial and especially with the fungi, the woody material is going to fuel that sort of bacterial and fungal battery, which is going to help lock up moisture, release moisture, and hopefully over time release nutrients, although we might experience some nitrogen deficiency as that matter decays, which again is fairly easily correctable. Now the beds are essentially wood to, I'd say, close to about a foot up, and then around that wood it's sort of wrapped, in a big Tootsie Roll of bucket packed sod, and then whatever topsoil we had in place is what we piled on top of these hills. Now that sort of gives us some pretty substantial variation in size, also because we planted our garden on a slope. We have one side of the bed that's longer than the other, so it can take more crops. And we're trying to integrate in both use of vertical and horizontal growing space by planting taller crops in the midst of ground cover type crops like zucchini, in the hopes of further increasing the productivity of our little experimental growing system here. Thank you for watching this installment of Aquarius Farms, and yeah, that's our huge planting mess and our busted wagon. So, Lord, I apologize for that. Thank you for watching another installment of Aquarius Farms, and we look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.